Wolves are mighty and often scary animals that are not to be trifled with. But when a wolf pack decided to dig up the grave of a recently deceased little girl, people had to make a stand. But what they discovered when the coffin was opened made them scream and left them reeling. Rosa Angela and Alfonso dos Santos had been married for 15 years. They lived in the beautiful city of Sao Paulo in Brazil and had formed a happy and loving life together. The two lovers were very alike in many ways. They had the same interests, liked the same music, and even enjoyed the same foods. They were like a match made in heaven. Some would even consider them soulmates. So strong was their relationship that the people around them frequently got jealous of how close the couple were. But not everything was as rosy and perfect as it seemed. You see, the pair had always desired to have a child of their own. They loved children and hoped one day to bring one into this world and raise it properly. Unfortunately, though, it seemed like nature had other plans. They had tried all kinds of methods, from the usual natural forms to more medical and invasive ideas, but still, nothing had worked. Still, life wasn't so terrible. They lived near a large forested area and would often stroll through the trees together. They got to know many animals, and in turn, the animals became comfortable with their presence, especially when they would bring food. 3 such animals were a small pack of wolves. There were 3 in total, and while they might have looked like vicious and dangerous animals, they were actually fairly tame and friendly. Rosa and Alfonso started to take meat for the wolves. As they were only a small pack, they found hunting and feeding themselves quite a challenge. At first, the wolves were wary and unsure of what to make of these kind people who were bringing them much-needed food. But as time went by, they became more and more happy to see Rosa and Alfonso. They welcomed the humans that brought them meat and started to anticipate their arrival whenever they would come to feed them every few days. The wolves and the humans really did form a close bond. One day, Rosa came to Alfonso with some good news. She was finally pregnant. They had been trying for so long, and finally it had paid off. They were both over the moon and celebrated the good news. They were so excited that they even told the wolves the next time that they went to feed them. This might seem absurd, as wolves wouldn't understand what the humans were saying, but the wolves could sense the couple's happiness and shared in their excitement. The day came when their daughter was born, and the couple welcomed the beautiful baby girl into the world. They named her Andrea after Rosa's grandmother. As Andrea grew, her parents made sure that they instilled into her the same love of animals that they had. When she reached the age of 2, they even took her to meet the wolves, who they still kept feeding. The wolves were a little older and bigger now, yet, despite their increasingly fierce looks, they remained friendly and even playful whenever they saw the small family coming to see them. So close were Rosa, Alfonso, and the wolves that they even allowed little Andrea to play near the wild animals. They were confident that the wolves would never do anything to harm her. The animals seemed fond of the little girl, and the girl seemed to love being around the wolves too. Not too long after Andrea's 3rd birthday, though, she got sick. It started with a fever before developing into vomiting and diarrhea. Her parents were so worried that they rushed her to hospital. Andrea had always been a happy and healthy child, so to see her sick and suffering was a truly heartbreaking thing. They rushed her to the hospital, where they hoped that the doctors would be able to tell them what the problem was and cure poor little Andrea. But the sad fact is that hospitals in the area of Sao Paulo were not as advanced as in other places in the world. Doctors rushed her off to a private room where even her parents weren't allowed to see her in case they made her condition worse. But even with all of the technology and all of the medical minds that they had, they were unable to diagnose Andrea in time. Sadly, she succumbed to her illness and passed away, much to the great sadness of her parents. Doctors eventually gave Andrea's body back to Rosa and Alfonso so they could mourn properly. This tore the couple apart. They had tried so hard to have a child, and it had been such a long and tricky road to finally conceive. And when they did, they were so happy. It was like nothing could go wrong, but things did go wrong. And now here they were, once again, childless, and it was tearing their once strong and solid marriage apart. The parents arranged their daughter's funeral, planning to bury her near the forest that the family loved to visit together. To show solidarity with Rosa and Alfonso, the entire town came to pay their respects. They all knew how badly the couple had wanted a child, and Andrea had been one of the most happy and extraordinary children anyone had ever met. For such a young girl to have died so suddenly and out of the blue was tragic and horrifying. The funeral was beautiful, and there were many tears shed. Once the long and difficult day was over, Rosa and Alfonso returned home to grieve privately. For many hours they sat in silence, unable to believe how their life had gone from so perfect and amazing to so terrible and grief-stricken. But a noise broke the silence, a knocking at the door. The parents answered it to find several people that lived in the town looking panicked and worried. Rosa asked what was up, and she was informed that the wolves were gathered around Andrea's grave and that they were starting to paw at the ground as if trying to dig her coffin up. Rosa and Alfonso were shocked and ran to the site of the burial. And just like the people of the village had said, there were the 3 wolves that they had grown so close to over the years. As they approached, the wolves gave them little more than a slight glance before returning to digging at the ground. They had made it several feet down already, and they showed no signs of tiring. Horrified, the 2 grieving parents dashed towards the animals to try to stop them, but the wolves all turned and growled at them, baring their huge, sharp teeth. Rosa and Alfonso were startled, as they had never seen the wolves act in that way before. They were suddenly worried about their own safety, and all they could do was stand back and watch the wolves dig and dig and dig. Eventually, though, they reached the coffin. But suddenly, a strange noise could be heard, a muffled kind of crying and whining. It wasn't coming from the town, nor was it coming from the forest near the grave. It was coming from inside the freshly uncovered coffin itself. Rosa's eyes went wide, and she covered her mouth as Alfonso dashed towards the coffin, no longer caring what the wolves would do. But the wolves simply stepped back and watched the man pry open the coffin lid with his hands, trying hard to get it open. By now, many people had heard the fuss and started to gather, watching helplessly as Alfonso wrestled with his daughter's coffin. Finally, with one huge tug, the lid swung open, and what was revealed made people scream with shock. There was Andrea, alive and well. Her eyes were filled with tears, and her voice was hoarse from screaming for help for so many hours. Her delighted parents pulled her from the coffin and hugged her tightly before rushing her back to the hospital. They requested to see a different set of doctors, who subsequently found out that Andrea had been accidentally put into a temporary coma, which rendered her dead to the outside world. The first set of incompetent doctors had not noticed the error and wrongly pronounced her dead. An investigation was quickly opened, and the hospital was taken to court for malpractice. But it was because Andrea was buried so close to the woods that the wolves had been able to hear her, even when other people couldn't. Over the years, Rosa, Alfonso, and Andrea had provided them with not only food, but company, and even love and affection. This was the wolves' way of repaying the kindness of the humans, and in doing so, they saved poor little Andrea's life. So now it's over to you. What do you think of this incredible and miraculous story? How would you have reacted if you were in Rosa or Alfonso's shoes, witnessing the scarily horrific sight of 3 wolves digging up the grave of your child? As always, we love to hear from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below.